from Bengal, where again there's been a crude bomb blast, and this is in Bhangar. We are given to understand 5 people are injured. 5 people are injured ahead of counting getting underway. There is a crude bomb blast that took place in the Chaltaberia area of Bhangar. 5 people were injured and they've been taken to hospital. Sources say the blast took place while some of them were making the crude bombs. Among the 5 injured, one of them is a Panchayat member of the ISF. Kamalika now joins us. So left, ISF at Trinamool, they have been at it in this region, in this area. There was even pre-poll violence, now post-poll violence too, ahead of counting.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is Bhangar is always known for violence. Anand, if you remember, during the Panchayat polls also, there were blasts and there were huge scale of violence there. Now, this has happened in the middle of the night when a huge sound came up from this Chaltaberia area, and then people reached there. We saw that there were bombs and 5 people were injured. They have been hospitalized, and one of them is an ISF Panchayat member. And sources tells us that they were making bombs there while it exploded. That's what the preliminary investigation says. Police and CAPF is there. But Bhangar falls under Jadavpur constituency, where Shayani Ghosh is contesting from TMC against Anirban Ganguly. But this is a place which is always violence, and no matter how many companies of CAPF are there, this still continues, and the start of the counting will start with such a news from Bhangar.
Well, thank you for that update. Let's hope all of them are safe, but they were actually making crude bombs. That's the report. They were making crude bombs. Will there be violent activity this time around? The last time around, the moment the forces, the central forces, the para forces left the counting centers and left Bengal, 48 hours of mayhem post the assembly elections was witnessed. This time, more than 440 companies are actually staying back. Kamalika was saying nearly 500 companies are going to be stationed in Bengal even after the elections and after the results to ensure that there is no large-scale violence. But if there is tayyari being made, then what does that represent? Smita Prakash of ANI is also with us this early morning, along with Nalin Mehta, Nistula Hebar. This whole aspect of violence, this whole aspect of trying to intimidate, put pressure, is this healthy or not? Do you believe results are going to get delayed because of this? Zaka believes that counting may be slowed down if everybody is trying to put pressure on the returning officer there at the counting centers.
Good morning. Glad to be here with all of you. But yes, this kind of intimidation tactic is not new. In many areas, it's endemic to certain parts where you were showing. But I think law enforcement authorities are in place. Of course, if there is a kind of a cluster bombing in the sense of cluster bombing of protests which happens, it does put law enforcement under extreme pressure, something that is not required in a democracy like ours, where peaceful transition from one government to the other happens through the ballot and not through danda. It's not something which is appreciated. And you know, we've had a history where 3-4 elections have seen one political party coming to power. So I can't see the reason why an opposition cannot accept if it's been free and fair. I can understand if there is a problem in certain areas, go to court, go to the election commission, explain. But street protests which turn violent is something that nobody wants in this country. So I really hope that better sense prevails, and this sar pe kafan bandh ke nikle hain kind of statements do not come from people who have gone through electoral processes in the past, tasted victory, tasted defeat. It's something that you take in your stride.
But can I ask a question about, you know, what concerns me is, I think Mr. Kharge had written a letter to all the civil servants, and then this morning again there's a tweet about, you know, we expect all civil servants to be impartial, and, you know, you owe your oath to the constitution and so on and so forth. What kind of pressure does that put? Like I keep saying, you know, if you're a returning officer today, you're like, my God, that's probably the second worst job after being an exit pollster today.
No, it is ominous. I get it that when these kind of statements come, but to be honest and free and fair is something that is inbuilt in a bureaucrat. I get that there are people who will blame bureaucrats for bending and for being unfair, partisan, prejudiced. all those things come with it. But on electoral duty, it's absolutely sacrosanct that those who have been selected to do this job, not every bureaucrat, not every not every officer gets to do what they are doing today, which is electoral. The creme de la creme of the bureaucracy has been put in charge of the electoral process. And they are working, and they've been working absolutely tirelessly and without a break for the past 8 weeks.
And in a large case, they forget, Rahul, just coming to you, they forget that most of the electoral officers are state level bureaucrats. They are already part of the state administration, they are teachers, and they are part of the electoral office. And they,
the word committed bureaucrat or the committed bureaucracy came from the Indira Gandhi years. Okay, so look, I'm not trying to sort of give everyone a clean certificate here or anything, but fundamentally, this whole business of trying to question the electoral process and justifying it by saying that even the so-called mother of all democracies, this is what transpired. Look, there's a huge difference between how the American Election Commission works and the Indian Election Commission works. We're very centralized. There, every district has its own rules on how to count elections.
They don't have a federal election
They don't
commission.
have a federal election commission. So we have to understand that there is a large scope for arbitrariness there. There is no scope here. Everything is laid down precisely. There is an election commission mandated guideline that has to be sort of followed to the T. There is a presence of electoral officers of each of the of the candidates and political parties in those counting centers. As journalists, you're allowed access to a certain point. We've all been there. We've all seen how it happens. There are 5 people who are checking each of the machines, including the officers of the political parties, and they have to sign off on each of those forms. So fundamentally, this is a watertight way of going about assessing the outcome of an election. Now, if you have a problem with the way the procedure has been outlined, there's enough time for you to approach court, go to parliament, lobby for it, set up a parliamentary committee to relook it. But you can't raise the bogey on the day of counting or a few days before that. And there has been a concerted attempt. It began with certain pollsters who have now become politicians to prescribe a number. And that number has now become the de facto number that the opposition is sort of tom-tomming. The attempt is to suggest that we have the real numbers, the exit polls are false. If our number is not validated by
then
the
entire
EVM,
process is
then
fraudulent.
the process is actually a fraud.
Let's call out the elephant in the room, and that is the opposition is resorting to this because they can't beat Modi in an election. Nistura, that's what it boils down to. They couldn't do it in 14, they couldn't do it in 19. They are unlikely to do it in 24 if going by the exit poll results. You don't want to concede to the fact that you are not able to defeat Mr. Modi in an election. That's why your EVM ka bahana, election commission ka bahana, this bahana, that bahana. That's what it boils down to.
Of course it does, because if you look at the opposition parties, what kind of a concerted political response has come from them following these defeats? What has been the review that has been done internally? In any other democratic setup like the UK, which we follow the Westminster model. The president of that political party and the leadership would have changed by now. There would have been a coup from within. Even Mrs. Thatcher could not survive beyond 11 years. And she won elections. I mean, she didn't survive it while in the saddle. So, what I'm saying is, if you're not doing your internal processes, then you have to blame something outside of it. Secondly, looking at the political history of this country or the electoral history of the country, we had a Congress-dominated system for so many years. Now, when the pole of politics has shifted, I don't think that has been kind of ingested by those who should or who are responsible for crafting a response, a political and electoral response.
And to capture the imagination of the people. I think the UK is a great example. I mean, Labour in the UK has been in the doghouse for the last 15 years. But now all polls are suggesting, and the UK will be going to polls the next month, all polls are suggesting that Labour will come back. How did they do that?
They had a problem with Corbyn, if you
Exactly.
remember.
They found a new leadership.
Then
They
got
found
Sir
a leadership that could articulate their vision for voters, and a
look at
large
the
number of voters are buying that vision.
There have been 6 prime ministers in the last 5 years.
Exactly.
I mean, there is a clear democratic process internally within political parties. You just can't hang on to power.
So if you're not responding to the people, then you allege conspiracy.
May I add something to the discussion, which is that while the Western liberal democracies have structured systems of succession, so you lose an election, the next leader has to, the old leader abdicates and the new one has to fight for leadership. We may not have structured system of succession in our political parties, but there is a system of meritocracy